Howdy Beans, and welcome back to the Howdy Beans podcast. I'm your host, Luke the Elder Bean. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're all good. As per usual, today we're going to be looking at Tron from 1982. Flint is alive. Yes, I'm so excited to be talking about Tron today because it's been on my list for ages. I've been promising it for a long, long time. But before we get into all of that and more Tron goodness, I want to do a bit of housekeeping because I've got to keep my house and my arcade and my game world pretty clean if I'm going to have visitors over in my virtual world. So make sure that you follow me on Twitter at howdybeans_pod. If you listen to this on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And finally, if you listen to this on Spotify, don't forget to leave a 5-star rating and to follow me on Spotify if you're not already. So as I said, we're going to be talking about Tron from 1982. I am a huge Tron fan. I've been saying for the podcast for a long time that I would do Tron, but it's always been a topic that I've wanted to do and I've been really excited about, but I've had to keep pushing it back because other things have come up. But recently, as of recording this on the 22nd of July, the new trailer for Tron Ares came out. Now, I'm not a big fan of the main actor in it, who is the guy from Red Hot Chili Peppers. His name's escaping me right now. Jared Leto, that was it. I'm not a big fan of Jared Leto, to be honest. Ever since he did the Joker in Suicide Squad, I lost all faith in the bloke completely. He kind of redeemed me a little bit in Morbius, but only for the first 30 minutes. And then after that, the movie kind of went terrible. But I don't think that was actually his fault. That was just studio things. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Morbius and Suicide Squad. Even though I'm not a big fan of Jared Leto, I have to admit, Tron Ares looks absolutely brilliant, to be honest. And it revitalized. It got me excited. Like, well, you know what? I said for ages I'm going to look into the Tron movies. I haven't watched the first Tron in years. And I've always wanted to talk about it for the podcast. So I figured, screw it. We're going to look into Tron. Now, admittedly, to kind of give you a bit of a backstory, my first sort of enjoyment, my first fascination with the Tron series actually started with Tron Legacy. That was the first experience I had with Tron. And I know a lot of people don't really like that movie. I know it was a movie that didn't do very well, but I remember watching that for the first time and being absolutely blown away. And again, I didn't know there was a Tron. I didn't know that was a thing. All I knew was that there was a new movie called Tron Legacy, and it looked absolutely fantastic. And I remember watching it and being blown away and being fascinated about these world and these characters and how it all works. And then finding out that there was a Tron from like the 80s. So I went back and watched that. And granted, it's a bit dated now, but watching that and be like, look, this is what they were trying to do and what they're able to do back in the 80s. And I remember just falling in love with this world. And I remember playing the game on the Xbox 360, which I actually think I reviewed that for the podcast in my first year. And I just remember just going down a rabbit hole of just wanting to see more Tron and hoping that we got a sequel to Tron Legacy. And then we didn't for years. And not that I gave up hope, because there's always rumblings that there was going to be another movie. It's just the fact of Disney doesn't know what they want to do. And then to finally hear that they're doing Tron Ares and then to see it's actually real, it's tangible, it's coming out this year. It's just revitalized me. So I just can't wait to get around to talking about Tron today. I am in an absolute excited, happy mood. And hopefully that is sort of translating over to you all. So let's get into it, shall we? So as for the movie synopsis, so it goes as followed. When talented computer engineer Kevin Flynn finds out that Ed Dingler, an executive at his company, has been stealing his work, he tries to hack into the system. However, Flynn is transported into the digital world where he has to face off against Dillinger's computerized likeness, Sark, and the imposing master control program. Aided by Tron and Yuri, Flynn becomes a freedom fighter for the oppressed programs of the grid. Doesn't that just sound brilliant? Like, even if you didn't know anything, if you've never watched Tron and you just heard that, it sounds brilliant. Like, it's incredibly 80s, but it's also incredibly futuristic as well. It's incredibly sci-fi, and this idea that a programmer goes into his own program to save the bits of code, bits of data, the other programs in the system, and frees them from sort of this big virus, this big corruption. It's to me, being somebody who did computer engineering, who did game design and stuff like that, it just my brain just sort of fizzles and zizzles, and it's just like, oh my god, it's incredible. It's like a nerdgasm. It's like, this just doesn't seem real, and then you watch it, you're like, oh god, this is great. And again, yeah, I just love Tron. I do. I just think it's great. I think it's a brilliant premise. And as I will talk about when I get around to talking about the movie, even though the movie doesn't look great now, to think what they were able to do back then and how it's kind of translated to what they did with Tron Legacy and what they're doing with Tron Ares as well. And I hope that movie is successful and it starts more of a Tron world and series and new trilogy of films, or even if they want to reboot it, I don't really care. Just give me more Tron, because the idea and concept is brilliant. It deserves to be out there and to be seen instead of be stuck on a shelf or stuck on like Disney Plus on a streaming platform, So that's the synopsis. As for the cast, so we've got Jeff Bridges, the dude Jeff Bridges, as Kevin Flynn, Bruce Boxleiter, again I'm probably butchering his last name, as Alan Bradley, David Warner as Ed Dillinger, Cindy Morgan as Laura, Bernard Hughes as Dr. Walter Gibbs, Dan Shaw as Ram, Peter Jurasicki as Crom, Stuart Thomas as Peter, Craig Cudley as Warrior 1, Vince Dedrick Jr. as Warrior 2, Sam Schratz as Expert Disc Warrior, and Jackson Boswick as Head Guard. So that is your cast. As for the production, so this one, I've kind of split it into two. So I want to talk about the origins, because I find the origins of how Tron actually came about incredibly fascinating, and I hope you guys too. So I'm going to talk about the origins, and then we'll get on to the actual production side of itself. So the inspiration for Tron occurred in 1976 when Steven Linsenberger, then an animator of drawing with his own studio, looked at a sample reel from a computer firm called Magic and saw Pong for the first time. He was immediately fascinated by video games and wanted to do a film incorporating them. According to Linsenberger, I realized that there were these techniques that would be very suitable for bringing video games and computer visuals to the screen. And that was the moment that the whole concept flashed across my mind. End quote. The film's concept of entering a parallel world was also inspired by the classic tale Alice in Wonderland. Lisenberger had already created an early version of the character Tron for a 30-second long animation, which was used to promote both Lisenberger Studios and a series of various rock radio stations. This backlit cell animation depicted Tron as a character who glowed yellow, the same shade that Lisenberger had originally intended for all the heroic characters developed for the feature-length film Tron. This was later changed to blue for the finished film. See pre-production, which I'll talk about below. The prototype Tron was bearded and resembled the Cylon Centaurians from the 1978 TV series Battlestar Galactica. Also, Tron was armed with 2 exploding discs, as Lisenberger described them as the 2 discs DVD edition, which I thought was really, really cool. Lisenberger elaborates, everybody was doing backlit animation in the 70s, it was that disco look. And we thought, what if we had this character that was a neon line and that was our Tron warrior? Tron was electric. And what happened was I saw Pong and I said, well, that's the area for him. And at the same time, I was interested in the early phases of computer generation animation, which I got into a MIT Boston. And when I got into that, I met a bunch of programmers who were into all that stuff, and they really inspired me, but how much they believed in this new realm. He was frustrated by the cliche-like nature of computers and video games and wanted to create a film that would open this world up to everybody. Lisenberger and his business partner, Donald Kirshner, moved to the West Coast in 1977 and set up an animation studio to develop Tron. They borrowed against the anticipated profits of their 90-minute animated television special, Animalympics, I think that's pronounced, to develop storyboards for Tron with the notion of making an animated film. But after Variety mentioned the project briefly during its early phase, it caught the attention of computer scientist Alan Kay. He contacted Lisenberger and convinced him to use him as an advisor on the movie, then persuaded him to use real CGI instead of just hand animation. Bonnie McBird wrote the first drafts of Tron with executive input from Lisenberger, basing the original personality of Alan on Alan Kay. As a result of working together, Kay and McBird became close and later married. She also created Tron as a character rather than a visual demo, and Flynn. Originally, McBird envisioned Flynn more comedically, suggesting that then 30-year-old Robin Williams for the role. That would have been awesome. Besides many story changes after the script went to Disney, including giving it a more serious tone with quasi-religious overtones and removing most of the scientific elements, none of her dialogue remains in the final film, and there was a rather bitter critics dispute. The film was eventually conceived as an animated film, brackened with live action sequences. The rest involved a combination of computer generated visuals and backlit animation. Lisenberger planned to finance the film independently by approaching several computer companies, but had little success. However, one company, Information International Inc., was receptive. He met with Richard Taylor, a representative, and they began talking about using live action photography with backlit animation in such a way that it could be integrated with computer graphics. At this point, there was a script and the film was entirely storyboarded. With some computer animation tests completed, he had spent approximately $300,000 developing Tron and had also secured $4 to $5 million in private backing before reaching a standstill. Lisenberger and Kushner took their storyboards as samples of computer-generated films to Warner Brothers, Metro-Gold, and Columbia Pictures, all of which turned them down. But in 1980, they decided to take the idea to Walt Disney, which was interested in producing more daring productions at the time. Tom Whitwell, Disney's vice president for creative development, watched Lisenberger's test footage and convinced Rob Miller to give the movie a chance. However, Disney executives were uncertain about giving $10 to $12 million to a first-time producer and director using techniques which, in most cases, had never been attempted. The studio agreed to finance a test reel which involved a flying disc champion throwing a rough prototype of the discs used in the film. It was a chance to mix live action footage with backlit animation and computer generated visuals. It impressed the executives at Disney and they agreed to back the film. McBird and Lisenberg's script was subsequently rewritten and re-storyboarded with the studio's input. At the time, Disney rarely hired outsiders to make films for them, and Kirshner found that he and his group were given a chilly reception because they, quote, tackled the nerve center, the animation department. They saw us as the germ from outside. We tried to enlist several Disney animators, but none came. Disney is a closed group, end quote. As a result, they hired Wang Film Productions for the animation. So that's the origins of Tron. And I find that very, very fascinating, to be honest. As for the production, so the production itself is just fascinating. So because of the many special effects, Disney decided in 1981 to film Tron completely in 65mm Super Panavision, except for the computer generated layers, which was shot in VistaVision, and both anthropomorphic 35mm and Super 35, which were used for some scenes in the real world, with subsequently blown up to 65mm. These three designs were brought in to create the look of the computer world. French comic book artist Jean Girard, also known as Mobius. Mobius again? How? I said it as a joke, but it actually came into it. This is Matrix. This is weird. Anyway, was the main set and costume designer for the film. Most of the vehicle designs, including Sark's aircraft character, the light cycles, the tank, and the solar sail, were created by the industrial designer Seed Mead Peter Lloyd. A high-tech commercial artist designed the environments. Nevertheless, these jobs often overlapped, leaving Guard working on the solar sailor and me designing terrain, sets, and the film's logo. The original program character design was inspired by Lisenberger's studio's logo of a glowing bodybuilder hurtling two discs. To create the computer animated sequences of Tron, Disney turned to the four leading computer graphics firms of the day. Information International Inc. of Culver City, California, who owned the Super Fulni F1, the fastest PDP-10 ever made and the only one of its kind. Magi of Ellsford, New York, Robert A. Abel and Associates of California, and Digital Effects of New York City. Bill Kovacs worked on the film while working for Robert Abel before going on to found Waterfront Technologies. The work was not a collaboration, resulting in a very different styles used by the films. Tron was one of the first films to make excessive use of any form of computer animation, and it is celebrated as a milestone in the industry. Although only 15 to 20 minutes of such animation were used, mostly scenes that show digital terrain or patterns or include vehicles such as light cycles, tanks, and ships, because the technology to combine computer animation and live action did not exist at the time. These sequences were interspersed with the filmed characters. One of the computers used had only 2 megabytes of memory and no more than 330 megabytes of storage, which sounds like a lot, but it isn't, especially how we use gigabytes nowadays, right? This put a limit on digital of a digital background, and at a certain distance, they had to produce a mixing in black to fade things out, a process called depth cueing. The film's computer effects supervisor, Richard Taylor, told them, "When in doubt, black it out," which became their motto. Originally, the film was meant to use white backgrounds, like in THX 11,038 inside the grid, but it would require such huge amounts of lights that it was decided to use black backgrounds instead. The computers used at the time could not perform animation, so the frames had to be produced one by one. In some of the more complex sequences, like the Solar Sailor moving through metal canyons, each frame could take up to 6 hours to produce. There was no way to digitally print them on film either. Rather, a motion picture camera was placed in front of a computer screen to capture each individual frame, which just sounds tedious, but it's also so fascinating. Most of the scenes, backgrounds, and visual effects in the film were created using traditional techniques and a unique process known as backlit animation. In this process, live action sequences inside the computer world were filmed in black and white on an entirely black set, placed in an enlarger to blow up, and transferred to large format Codif high contrast film. These negatives were then used to make Codif sheets with a reverse positive image. Clear cells were laid over each sheet, and all portions of the figure, except the areas that were exposed for the later camera passes, were manually blacked out. Next, the Codif sheets and cell overlays were placed over a light box, while as a Vista Vision camera mounted above it made separate passes and different color filters. A typical shot normally required 12 passes, with some sequences like the interior of the electronic tank could need as many as 50 passes. About 300 matte paintings were made for the film, each photographed onto a large piece of chrome film before colors were added by Gallatin filters in a similar procedure as the Kaleidif. The matte's rotoscope and CGI were then combined and composed together to give them a technological appearance with multiple layers of high contrast, large format positives and negatives. This process required truckloads of sheet film and a workload even greater than that of a conventional cell animated feature. The Codif was specifically produced as large sheets by Kodiak for the film and came in numbered boxes so that each batch of the film could be used in order of manufacture for a consistent image. However, this was not understood by the filmmakers, and as a result, glowing outlines and circuit traces occasionally flicker as the film's speed varied between batches. After the reason was discovered, this was no longer a problem, as the batches were used in order, and zinger sounds were used during the flickering parts to represent the computer world malfunctioning, as Leisenberg described it. That's cool. That's a cool way to get around it. Leisenberg later had these flickers and sounds digitally corrected for the 2011 restored Blu-ray release, as they were not included in his original vision of the film. Due to its difficulty and cost, this process of backlit animation was not repeated for another feature film. No way. Like, no shit. Makes sense, you know? That sounds like an absolute ball ache, but you have to really give it to them that they were like, we're going to do this, we're going to do it properly. And they did. So sound design and creation for the film was assisted to Frank Serafin, who was responsible for the sound design of Star Trek, the motion picture, in 1979. They were over 750 units, separate tape segments in the picture, said Serafin. He created all the sound effects in the movie exclusively by synthesizers and similar electronic devices. At one point in the film, a small entity called Bit advises Flynn with only the words yes and no, created by Voltrack's speech synthesizer. Bright wrote, although this film is very much the personal expression of Steven Lisenberger's vision, nevertheless, it has certainly been a group effort. More than 569 people were involved in the post-production work, including 200 inkers and hand painters. 85 of them were Taiwan's Cuckoo's Nest studio. Unusual for an English language production, in the end credits, the Taiwanese personnel were listed with their names written in Chinese characters. There's so much to go into with this film. Like, if I'm going to production, I'll do one more. So the film features parts of the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. The multi-story Encom laser bay was the target area for the Shiva solid state multi-beamed laser. Say that when you're drunk. Also, the stairway that Alan and Laura and Flynn used to reach Alan's office is a stairway in building 451 near the entrance to the main machine room. The Cubicile scenes were shot in another room of the lab. At the time, Tron was the only film to have scenes filmed inside this lab. And there's, like I said, there's loads more I can go into about Tron, but that is the basics. And I wanted to get the more technical side out there because it really impresses me. And this is why I love Tron so much, is the fact of when you look at the production of how much they had to do and how tedious it was, and having to shoot each individual frame like manually, and you look at that and you think, nowadays studios wouldn't do that. And of course they wouldn't do that. They'd get AI, or they'd get, computer generations are a lot better now and storage is a lot better now, so that's not needed. But you look at this you look at the work that's involved, you go, well, studios wouldn't do that nowadays because it's too much work. But back then, it felt like studios were just willing just to be like, look, we'll give it a go. We'll give it a go, and we'll see what the end result is. And if it's success, it's great. If it's not, it's not. You know what I mean? And you've really got to, you've got to be impressed. You've got to be inspired, because like it's a lot of work, but the end result is brilliant, to be honest. And I didn't know those bleeps and clicks and flickers. I thought that was just a design choice. I thought that was just part of the film. I didn't realize that was to cover up a mistake in pre-production. So that just makes me love it even more. And it's kind of a shame. And again, I've never watched the Blu-ray sort of newer version, but it'd be the shame to watch that version now and to know that those parts were taken out, even though it wasn't part of the original vision of it. Those kind of things make the film really kind of still remind you, like, oh, we're in a digital world. We're not actually in the real world. We're somewhere different because of the bleeps and clicks and flickers and that sort of thing. So I love those little bits for me personally. But yeah, like the production is just bonkers. The origins is bonkers. The pre-production itself, it's very technical. They were using some of the best technology for the time. It's crazy how they were using megabytes, even though that nowadays we're using terabytes now. But like gigabytes is a lot huger, and it's just, I don't know. It's insane that they're able to do this back in 1982, and they're able to pull it off. Granted, you can say this movie hasn't aged well nowadays, which is a fair enough thing to say. But to look at what they were able to do in 1982 with the technology they had, it's like looking at what NASA was able to do to send men into space and send men to the moon. Of like your dishwasher or your tumble dryer downstairs in your kitchen has more computing power than what they had on the space shuttle to get them to and from the moon. So, just to quantify it into sort of a way of understanding of, or the technological advancement that we have now compared to what they had. And so looking at the computers that we have today and the way that we make movies and the way that we make digital movies and things like that, and then to look how they had to do it very manually. Everything was very basic. Everything was pretty much analog, really. They had to do everything by hand as much as they possibly could because the computing power just wasn't there. It's just inspiring to me, and it seems really fascinating. Somebody who did computer design and game and computer science in college and university, for me, it's incredibly impressive, and I'm just sat here in awe in that case, to be honest. And it's got me more excited now. I know what went into making this movie, how much love and sort of care and patience and that went into making this movie. It's got me really excited to watch it now. So I'm just going to go off and watch the movie, and then when I come back, I'm going to give you my first impressions. I'm going to talk about the story, the music, production, sort of the set design and all that stuff, and I'll give you my overall thoughts. Like I said, it's been a long time since I've watched Tron, so I'm looking forward to going back into the program and seeing what it's all about once again, just before Tron Ares comes out. So until then, I will see you in a minute, programs. Flynn's alive! Yay! Sorry about that. I'm just really, really excited after watching this incredible movie. Welcome back, everybody. I have now watched Tron again after years and years, and it's still great. What I love about this movie, and again, we're going to go straight into first impressions, obviously. What I love about this film is the fact of it is a miracle it was made at all. Because again, we talked about in the introduction about the production of this film, and it's not until you actually watch the movie that you can appreciate all the hard work that went into it, because it's one of them films that when you watch it, you sit there and you go, how did they do this? How did they do this in 1982? What sort of devil's sort of contract did they sign for this to work? Because it shouldn't work. It shouldn't look this good. Now, granted, I was watching the Blu-ray, so I was watching it in 1080p, so it's clearer, it's sharper, it's a better image, so that could be why it looks so good. But I remember watching this movie back when I was younger, back on a VHS tape. And obviously that was cutting edge at the time. But I remember watching it like that and still being blown away because it looked so real. It was so seamless going from the real world to the digital world to the grid that it was one of those when, as a young age, I was just blown away. I was like, this is brilliant. And then getting into video games around that time as well, and getting into gaming and stuff like that. And eventually, as life went on, I eventually got into virtual reality, and I went to university and I studied game design and augmented reality and all that jazz. It's always been a very big inspiration to me, and I just can't believe it then, and I still can't believe it now that they're able to pull off this movie. Because yes, even though you look at some of the sort of models, some of the sort of like in the models of the light cycles, or the what those ships things called? Monitors. I think they're called monitors. The ship things that fly look like a giant sort of upside down, like an N sort of shape in the air. Some of the models, they don't look brilliant, but for the time they were cutting edge. They were incredible, and it's just one of those where it's like no one ever did it afterwards, and no one's ever done it really since. And it makes sense because again, it's a lot of work. Obviously, Disney having a lot of their money that they could fund something like this. But it's just one of those of like, it's so brilliant and so sort of pushing the boundaries that if I was a little kid back in 1982 and I went to the cinemas to see this, I would just feel like I was watching the future. Like the only thing I can compare it to, and some people might think I'm a bit crazy for saying this, but I feel like it's a good sort of way to compare. Do you remember back in like 2008, 2009, I think it was, when Avatar came out? When Avatar came out, it blew people out the water. That's the only movie that I remember that was in cinemas all year round because people kept going back to see it, because it pushed the boundary. It was bleeding edge. It was new. It was doing something that had never been done before. People wanted to go to Pandora, and I've talked about it before. People were getting sort of the Navi syndrome, the Pandora syndrome, because people were getting visibly depressed and sad that they couldn't live and go to Pandora and live like a Navi. It was a real thing, and it's still apparently a thing going on today. And I remember watching that movie, being blown away, watched it on Blu-ray, being even more blown away. I still watch that movie now. I love Avatar. And it's the same when the new one came back a year or two later, Way of the Water. Same thing. It took what they did in the first one, but, took years and years to mastercraft and perfect and all that kind of stuff. And then they were like, okay, this is what movies are going to be in the next 10 to 20 years to look like. And it's just one of those where you look at it and goes, this is the future of cinema. And the reason I bring it up is the fact of that's how I could probably imagine what it was like for kids and maybe adults as well back in the beginning of the 80s when they watched Tron. Were like, this is the future. This is what computer graphics can be or will be, and this is what we're going to be the type of movies that we're going to watch. Now granted, it probably wasn't until probably around about the late 80s 90s, so another like 10 to 11 or so years later after this movie came out, that we started seeing more movies like this because again of the bleeding edge and because it was so expensive to make a movie like this. But even so, there was probably still a lot of inspirations that were taken from this movie that we'd seen in other ones. But it's just one of those where you watch it and you think it's just brilliant. It's just amazing that they were able to do what they did back then, and it still looks good now. And like moving on to sort of the story, because again, I could gush about sort of my first impressions for ages, but sort of moving on to the story, I feel like the story is incredibly poignant today, more so than ever than it was back in 1982, because the idea of Tron, the story of Tron, is basically you've got this computer world, you've got this program called the grid, and it's basically like a data place, really, where like data and programs are stored. And you have these programs that are thinking for themselves. And the idea behind it, you've got these programs and you've got the creators who are us, so the humans who are the programmers who are creating these programs to do things, basically, to do things in the company. Then you've got the sort of main sort of bad guy, Dillinger. He takes over the company and he puts in his own code to this master control system. The problem is, and again, this is why it's so poignant today than it was back in 1982, was the fact of the programs are clever. They're thinking for themselves. And again, they call them programs then, but we call that AI. We call that a sort of advanced intelligence. And for me, that's going to be really fascinating because I'm fascinated in sort of AI and AI development. And again, I've spoke about this before when I did my book review on that Halo book that I read, Saint's Testimony, which is a brilliant short novel in the Halo universe. It's really, really good. It talks about like AI and creation and stuff like that. Like it's a brilliant review. Go check it out. It's fantastic. But I've talked about my thoughts and feelings there about AI, but that's why I feel like it's so poignant today, is because we live in a world now with AI where like AI is a real thing. You know, there are companies that are developing it. We have Grok for crying out loud on Twitter. Like, granted, I've never used it and I won't use it because I don't like the idea of having that sort of AI. The way I feel about it is that if we're going to make advanced intelligence, it should be there to help humanity in terms of making cures, finding ways to cure the planet, you know, to stop climate change, that sort of things. And not to have ways to kind of take over our lives or to basically make lives easier, but not make it too easy where we don't do things for ourselves, or basically Skynet, which I don't think it ever would get to Skynet. But again, it depends on who's making it and what they've programmed to do. But that's a completely different topic, and I don't want to get into it because that's not Tron. But that's why I feel like this movie is so important, and why it never made sense to me that Disney wouldn't take one of their biggest and probably most original and interesting science fiction franchises, and why it took them so long to make a sequel with Tron Legacy, which is where it began for me. I remember watching Tron Legacy for the first time, being blown away, and then finding a tape of Tron, watching that and just being blown away and be like, okay, this is the beginning, this is the middle. You know, Tron Legacy was amazing. Of course, they're going to make a sequel, and they didn't for years. And finally, you know, they're now starting to look into doing Tron Ares, which is actually taking the programs out of the grid, out of the program world, and putting them into the real world and seeing how that affects it. And from looking at the trailer, it looks like it's going to deal a lot with that, and it's going to talk a lot about AI and programs and what rights they have and that sort of thing. So it's absolutely brilliant. But I just like the idea that we have these programs, we have these AI constructs that are being made, that it almost goes very religious in there. They talk about their creators. They talk about them as if they were gods, as if my creator's talking to me. I need to get to my creator. My creator would tell me what to do. The creator will make the grid better, and we've got to stop the monitor. And then you've got like characters like Ram and Crom. You know, I've got these characters where they're programs, but you feel connected to them, because even though they're just programs, one of them I think is to do accounts. I think the other one is like a hedge fund sort of program. They're just programs, but you feel connected to them. You care about them. You care if they live or if they die, or if they get sort of deleted or not. And you get a real sort of connection to them. And then you got Tron as well, and like that being like the sort of big sort of security software that's going to like cure everything and save everything. I just think it's a brilliant movie. And like, I love how it goes into, like I said, the religion side of it, and I love how it doesn't go too deep into it. It just has that sort of hints of like my creator and stuff like that. And I'm trying to find the best way to how to explain it. I love when Flynn goes into sort of the grid, and obviously we'll talk about the effects on that in a minute, but when he goes to the grid for the first time and he just sees it as a game, because again, he's a programmer, but at the same stage, Flynn, Jeff Bridges' character, he's also a gamer as well. He's one of the best gamers. He's got his own Flynn's Arcade. He made all of the games himself. He's the one that programmed all the games, so he knows how to play them, how to beat them, how they work. So at first he sees them as a game, and then as he gets into it, he realizes this is not a game. If I die, I'm getting deleted. I'm alive, but I'm code at the moment. I'm digital. Like, I can die here. I can be terminated and gone forever, and just pixie dust, fairy dust, like I'm gone. And it starts getting more real to him, and then it starts getting more real to us, the viewer, as well. Oh God, he is in danger here. And sort of as the adventure goes on, you get to see the different games that they play, and then the light bikes, and which is basically Snake. Really, is like you just gotta try and. But like, have you seen those games like Snake, those Snake IO games where like people go around, loads of people online go around these grids and they're collecting things and they're getting longer and longer. And if you manage to cut somebody off, they get destroyed and they turn into bits and then you eat all their bits. Kind of the same sort of idea. But again, light cycles, great. I love to see that. The visuals, like I said as well, are brilliant. That somebody actually did a comment when I posted onto Twitter that I was watching this movie. Somebody made a comment, and I'll read out their comment in full near to the end. But they made a comment which I thought was brilliant, and I had to sort of mention it. Was the fact that they said it feels like Tron is a movie that was made in like the big late 1900s, like 1902, 1912, that sort of thing, and was discovered and sort of re-updated, remade, sort of like remastered resolution, that sort of thing, with like modern graphics of the time. It just looks and feels old and new, and it feels science fiction, but it feels sort of different. Like I don't remember ever seeing anything like this as well, before or after. And Tron's just so unique, and it's just one of them films that you watch and you think, how is it that they didn't do anything? It took them so long to do anything with it. And then when they did do with it, it was, I thought it was brilliant. I like Tron Legacy, but it didn't land for a lot of people, and they waited years and years and years, and it's only taken years later until they decided to do another one, which I'm glad they are, and I really do hope that Tron Ares does really well, because if it does, that means they'll do more of them. Again, Jared Leto, I'm not too keen, but I just hope, my fingers crossed, that it's good. The trailer looks good, so I've got to sort of have hope and have faith that it is. But yeah, the music, the blips and the bleeps, because again, even though I watched it on the Blu-ray version, the bleeps and the clips and all that, was still there. I was actually going to do the Spaceball sings. I've got the blips, I've got the creeps, and I've got the sweeps. They all sounded the same. I know I can't do voices. Well, I can, but I can't do. That guy was a legend for doing voices. I can't do as well as him, but still, I like those beats. I love those atmospheric moments, because it was a way to differentiate where you was. Because again, obviously in the real world, we don't have blips and cliques and things like that, So you could differentiate. You knew that, okay, I'm in the game world. I'm on the grid. Things are different, and the costumes that they wear, and they've got the lights on it as well. And again, I would have to admit, yes, I like I said, I watched it on HD, sort of high definition 1080p Blu-ray disc, so it would be clearer, it would be sharper. But even so, that doesn't always mean good, because there's been times when I've watched Blu-ray upscales of movies, and they're not been good. I can't think of any on top of my head, but not all sort of Blu-ray upscales have actually been good. Sometimes watching it like in the standard definition, best one that comes to mind, Jurassic Park. I remember watching Jurassic Park for the first time on VHS on a tape. And I remember that movie looking, again, brilliant and incredible, because, again, that's all I knew. It's amazing. Now, not to say that Jurassic Park doesn't look brilliant or credible, because it still does, and the dinosaurs still look real. But the problem is with modern technology is the fact of when you upscale it and you make it look better and you put HD into it and things are more clearer and sharper, things get brighter. It's less dark. There's more light. That you can see more of a clearer image, which is great, but also means you can see more details. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that isn't. So that even though the dinosaurs still look good, the dinosaurs look better in the standard version of the movie, because that's what it was shot for. It was shot for those cameras. It was shot for that sort of image. Whereas when you upscale it, you can see some things don't look as good. It's sometimes where it's meant to be darker, it's a bit brighter, so you can see more details than you were meant to see, and things like that. So it doesn't always work. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But this is one of the moments where I feel like it worked to a point where it made everything just look a lot more space age. It made everything feel a lot more futuristic, a lot more sort of digital. Because obviously I remember when I watched the original version, it was a lot grainier. And again, it still feels futuristic, but when you watch it, when it's a lot more clearer and sharp and less grainy, you kind of lose the retro side of it, but you still get the futuristic look, and that futuristic look is more sort of embellished. And again, I love that. And again, that's kind of what you want in when you're on the grid and when you're at the actual world of Tron, when you're in the game world, you want it to be more futuristic. You want it to look that way. So, music, production, art design, all great. Yeah, overall thoughts. Tron, it's a brilliant movie. It's a fantastic film. Admittedly, I will put my hand on my heart and I'll be honest, and I will say that I do prefer Tron Legacy. I know it sounds sacrilege, mostly because that movie is a lot quicker. The thing is with Tron, even though it's a brilliant movie and I do love it and I'll sing its praise all day, every day, it's a movie of its time, which means it's a bit slow to get going, and it's not until you really get onto the grid where things start to speed up. But even then, you'll have a lot of you'll have sort of quick moments, quick action when they're doing the games, and then you'll have a lot of slow sort of, not, I don't want to say boring because it's not very fair, but very slow moments, and you're kind of waiting for it to sort of pick up again, and it does. And when it does, it's great, but it's you have those lulls. It's like a wave. You have the dips where it's like high, low, high, low, high, low. Whereas what I like about Tron Legacy is the fact of which it's very sort of quick. It's very streamlined. It's very sort of fast. And again, I just like Tron Legacy. Again, I think it's because it's my first introduction to the world of Tron, to the grid. That's probably why I like Tron Legacy more. But still, Tron's still fantastic. It's still a brilliant movie. It's about an hour and 35 minutes. That goes by really, really quickly, really, even with the lulls. It's just the fact of I just prefer the sequel to the original, but the original is still brilliant and I still recommend it. You know, the futuristic feel of it, the sort of talking about sort of programs and programs thinking for themselves, and then Flynn going into this world and he's talking to the programs. He ends up talking to Clue, his own sort of creation that he made, and then talking to Tron and how he makes friends with Ram, and then it's these moments where he realizes that this is more than what he thought. He just saw it as a program. He saw it as code, but then you realize that it's actually a living being. It's a tangible thing that's alive, that's thinking for itself, that wants to live, that wants to survive. It changes sort of his mission, that he's not just saving the grid from the Monitor, from Dillinger. He's saving it for them. And again, it expands more on this when you get to the second movie, but he is trying to save that for that, because like his original plan was to get there, find the proof that he needs to show that it was him who made the grid, it was him who programmed everything, that he was basically had full creative sort of license and creative control of it all, but it was taken from him by Dillinger. That's what he went in looking for, and what he found was life. He found that he'd created something new, that he created life. He created programs that were thinking for themselves, that have a type of religion, and that they have thoughts and feelings, and they don't want to die, and they don't want to be deleted. And it just expands, and like that is fascinating. And I love the sequels for expanding upon that and that building upon it, and sort of following that narrative. And that's why I feel like it's so poignant, because we're getting to the point now with AI that it's becoming more of a thing of like, eventually it's going to come to I'm sure it's already around the corner, but eventually it'll get to the point where we'll make a program that starts thinking like HAL 9000, just not evil, but it will start thinking for itself. It will start doing things, and then people will get scared, and then people will go, well, you'll have one side go, shut it off, turn it off, stop it. It's getting too smart. It's getting too sentient. We've created life. We didn't mean to. You'll have one side of the people who say, turn it off. And you'll have the other side of people who goes, no, they deserve rights. They're alive, X, Y, and Z and all that jazz. And it's going to be one of them arguments of like, do we give a program life? What constitutes as life? And this is the thing, and this has always been my argument, is the fact of, and again, I always quote Ian Malcolm with this because it's one of the best quotes from Jurassic Park, but it's really poignant when it comes to stuff like this, is the fact of you were too busy seeing if you could, you never looked around to see if you should. You never thought, oh, maybe should we be doing this? You just like, we can, so we will, because if we don't do it, they're going to do it. Them being sort of China and Russia and all that, so if we don't do it, they're going to do it. So might as well, we have to do it. And it's one of them things of like, well, the problem is, at the end of the day, humans don't understand humans. We don't understand ourselves. We don't understand why we dream. We don't understand why. We don't even understand life. What the meaning of life is. We don't know or understand consciousness. How the brain, like we know what the brain does and how it works, but we actually don't know why it does certain things or how certain things happen and things like that. You know what I mean? So there's so many things that we don't understand about ourselves, about our planet, about the universe, about life in general, as to why life is, right? There's theories, but we don't actually know, right? So how could we create new life, which is that's what we're doing. We're creating new life. It's just in a digital form. It's not in a sort of organic form. We're creating this life when we don't understand life as it is. We don't understand what thinking is. We don't understand what thoughts are. We don't understand like consciousness or anything like that. And we're just making new things like that eventually is going to start thinking for itself. Why does it think for itself? Why is it doing that? We don't know. We don't know the answers because we don't know why we're doing it ourselves. So that's the be all and end all, really, is the fact of, again, to bring it back to Tron, is the fact of it's all well and good creating programs, and it's all well and good creating new things that make things better for humanity. But where you've got to sort of stop and ask the question is the fact of, how far is too far? Shall we what if it gets to a point where it gets too smart? It's smarter than us, and it starts to take over, or it starts to see that the best way to help humanity is to get rid of humanity, or things like the Ultron effect, that sort of thing, or the Skynet sort of idea. And I can see why people are worried, see why that scares people, because at the end of the day, if we think that way, why isn't it that something that we've programmed wouldn't think that way too? You know what I mean? Or something that's smarter than us, that has better brain capacity and brain thought and that sort of thing, wouldn't think that way, and logic and stuff like that. Because again, it's a program. It hasn't got a heart or hasn't got a soul, or maybe it does. Because again, we don't know what a heart or a soul. Well, we know what a heart is, but you know what I'm trying to say. Like, we don't really know what a soul is or consciousness is. So maybe it does have a consciousness. Maybe it doesn't work in logic. Maybe we're just thinking it does think in logic because it's ones and zeros. Maybe logic is the foundations of life, or maybe it isn't. I don't know. That's the point. We don't know. So the question is, should we be making life that can do these sort of things or think this way when we don't even know why we think ourselves? So sorry to get all sort of theoretical with you all and that sort of thing, but it's a topic that fascinates me, and it's one of those where I feel like as the years go on, it's going to be ones that we're going to be talking about more and more. It's got to be ones that we're going to be looking at more and more. We're going to be looking back at movies like Tron. We're going to be looking back at movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey. We're going to be looking at like games that have like the Geth and stuff like that. And we're going to look like Mass Effect, and we're going to be looking at Skynet, Terminator, Ultron, and all the other sort of AIs and sort of advanced intelligences and that have been made by humans. And we're going to look back at stuff like that, and we're going to look, well, did we make the right decision? Did we follow the warnings? Did we ignore the warnings? Or did it end well because we were able to learn from the things that we were trying to say back then? So yeah, I think, to come back to Tron, because I went on a bit of a tandem there, I feel like this movie and the sequels are more poignant now than they were when they were made. And I just feel like because of that, I think that's why Tron has been such a cult classic, is as technology has advanced, as technology has gotten better, and computing power has gotten better, and movies have gotten better, it's always been one of those that people will look back on and go, that is where sort of it began, that thought and that feeling of, this is what movies can be, this is the future. And it took 10 to 12 years, but eventually movies started to catch up, and we started to see more better technological CGI sort of films. And then time jumped again, and then we have movies like Avatar, and then with the topic of AI, computing and stuff like that, and then it jumps again. Then we have more movies that do it, and like Terminator and stuff like that, and eventually, where we are today. So I feel like Tron has been a big inspiration for a lot of things, for cinema, for the ideas and topics in science fiction. and it's got a lasting legacy. And like I said, the reason it's called classic is because it is just a brilliant movie. That, like, again, granted, yes, it's slow at parts, and it can get a little bit sort of you wish it was a bit quicker, less talky, more action. But even so, you can appreciate it for what it is and what it tries to do. And even if you want to look at this movie as a sort of example, as a sort of bleeding edge test, sort of test footage, sort of test example. There is a name for it. I can't think of it. I'm sure I'm listening back to this now. It's so and so, but that's future me, but past me struggling at the moment. But what I'm trying to say is the fact of Tron is basically one of them movies where it was a proof of concept. It was like, this is what can be done. This is what films can be in this medium, and you can still tell great stories and have great characters in this medium. And this is what movies are going to be like in the next, say, like 10 to 12 years. And we did see that. You know, as the 80s went on and as we got into the 90s, we got to see more movies like this and tackling ideas and concepts that were told in this film. So, what they were able to do with Tron was absolutely incredible. If you haven't seen Tron, I'd highly recommend it. I haven't really spoiled anything, to be honest. There is still a lot more, and I'd say even though the story's good, you would probably come to Tron for the visuals. Even though some of it has dated a bit, you just come for the visuals, come for the adventure, come for the science sort of the sci-fi sort of science fiction. Going from the real world into a game world, into to become a program, to go onto the grid. Yeah, I just think for the visual spectacle, that's what you come for. The story's good as well, but for me, I always come back to Tron just for the fact of, I can't believe they did this back in 1982. It feels so science fiction. It feels so sort of cutting edge, so futuristic, that it just amazes me, even now, that they were able to do this in 1982. It's just, I just can't believe it. I'm still in awe. But yeah, so that is my overall thoughts before we end things. So as I do always when I talk about movies, I always post onto Twitter and I always ask the audience, you guys, what are your thoughts on what I'm watching? So I put it up that I'm watching Tron, and these are some of the replies. And I actually had a lot of replies, and thank you to everybody who reposted and liked. It means a lot. This is probably one of the most sort of commented ones I've had in a long time. So I really just appreciate it. So the first one was from Cinema Recall podcast, brilliant podcast. They say, watching Tron now feels like they found an old movie from the 20s and can put computer graphics over it. Later, they shot new footage and spliced that in. Love how retro and futuristic it feels. Score by Wendy Carlos is a treasure too. This is the comment that I was on about. And how it does feel like it was from the 20s. I would say I even made the comment, it feels like... what comment did I use? Hold on. Actually, no, tell you what. I wrote it down. Here it is. So the comment I put was, I completely agree. Like the 1902 French film, A Trip to the Moon, which is a French movie called La Voyage d'Anes la Lune. If you've seen that movie, it's way ahead of its time, even for then. So I could definitely imagine this film being made in the 20s and 30s and then rediscovered and fixed. Because it does. It has that retro feeling, but it feels like old cinema. It feels like, again, if you've watched the 1902 French film, A Trip to the Moon, which if you haven't, it's a silent movie, but it's absolutely brilliant, right? Because, again, I'm not going to get into it because it's a completely different topic. And I love cinema. But, like, cinema that we know, movies and filmmaking began in France, began in Paris. And what the French were doing back in like the 1902 and in the beginning of the 1900s with film and making movies is out of this world. There's some incredible and clever films that they made. That's one of them. A Trip to the Moon. And again, I recommend to give it a watch if you haven't seen it. It's absolutely fantastic. But Tron does feel like one of the films that was made in like the 20s and 30s, where they didn't have the technology back then, but they tried with what they had to do what they best they could. And then the movie was rediscovered in the 80s. Then they took sort of 80s technology, 80s sort of computing power, and reshot some things. And it does feel like old but new, but also retro. I can't really explain it. It's just the fact that when you watch this movie, it just has that feeling. It feels different because at the time, nothing had been done like it before. And again, even though I know you can't really say it for nowadays because we have seen movies like it nowadays, and again they have made sequels, but it does feel like this movie was made when it was made, but it also feels like it was made before then, and it was made after then, like years later. Like I can't really explain it, put into words, but I completely get where cinema recall comes from. It generally feels like an old film that was rediscovered and was sort of reshot and put new computer graphics over the top and made better. I just can't explain it. It just does, and I love it for that. They also replied back saying, "Yes, I have. I got to watch a bunch of George Miles shorts on the big screen last year. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Like the way they shot things. Like one day I'm going to look back at those old movies on the podcast because they're brilliantly made and so clever. I'm going to have to write them down and look back at them in the future because those movies, those French films, were like if it wasn't for them, I don't think cinema would be around anymore because what they were doing was just sort of otherworldly. But that's a completely different topic that I don't want to get into because I'll be here all day talking about that. Then we had sort of the VHS Abyss movie podcast. They went, always wanted to go on a Tron bike when I was a kid. Still do, to be fair. Also used to love playing the Tron game on my Commodore 64. It was basically like the original Nokia Snake game, but better. Yeah, see, I've always wanted to go on a Tron bike. I've always wanted to go on a light cycle. I think it's like Disneyland. Is it Disneyland California? And I believe Disneyland Tokyo. I think they've got a Tron light cycle ride that you can actually get on the bikes. And I've seen the video. It's probably best to ride it at night because obviously you have a lot of the Tron lights and stuff like that. But you get to ride it, and they go for like obviously you're on tracks. It's like a roller coaster. And you have like sections where you've got screens around you. It looks like you're on the grid, and then you get shot off again. It looks like it's fantastic. That's probably the closest I'll ever get to riding a light cycle. But I've always wanted to as well. As for the Commodore 64 thing, way before my time. When I was born in 98, to the end of the 90s, a lot of the things I was playing was like the GameCube, Game Boy Advanced, but then again, I had a Game Boy SP. I didn't actually play any Tron games until the Xbox 360 when I think it's the Commodore version of Tron, the light cycle game, was ported onto the Xbox Arcade, and that was the first time I actually played any Tron game. I actually didn't know it was based off a movie at the time. I just saw this game called Tron. It was like a couple of pence on the arcade store. I remember putting loads of hours into it, not knowing that there was a movie based off it. I was just having a lot of fun with like the old graphics, playing it on like a newer console. I just thought it was great. So I had played it. I just didn't play it on the Commodore 64. But just the idea of playing Tron on the Commodore 64 just sounds really, really cool. But even that, I know it's retro, but it sounds retro and also futuristic at the same time. It's just Tron just has this sort of thing about it, is that when you talk about it, even though it's retro, it feels futuristic. It just does. It has this aura feeling old but new. It's incredible. And then we have Stellar Future Radio podcast. They go, it's a huge inspiration to them. And then that's it, really. Also, there was one from Screen Nerds podcast. They posted on there that they did a review of this movie. So if you want to go onto my Twitter and find my Tron post, if you scroll to the bottom and give a listen to Screen Nerds podcast, give a listen to their episode, I'd greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they'll greatly appreciate it too. That is it for what the public said. As for some trivia, because I love doing a bit of trivia. When the film was a commercial failure, the arcade video game based on it proved to be a tremendous hit and actually outgrossed the film, which is kind of funny and interesting, isn't it? It was like the movie was a commercial failure, but the game itself was a hit. And there's probably a chance as well that people probably didn't know that it was based off the film, because if it was a commercial failure, it means not many people went to go see it. So there's a high likelihood that it was people played the game but didn't know anything to do with the film. And obviously back then, when you watch movies in the cinema, and then you probably would never see the movie ever again unless you got lucky and it went on to TV. Because again, that's how it was back then. If you didn't catch it in the cinema, you didn't catch it at all. You probably had to wait a year or two, or maybe longer, till it was put onto cable, put onto TV. and then you had to be lucky enough to catch it and watch it, because again there was no way of going to like streaming or rewind or anything like that. It's like you either watched it live or you didn't. Or eventually when things, and that's why video was so popular and so successful. And again, I don't want to get into it, but Disney has a whole thing with the Disney Vault and stuff like that, which again is another topic for another day, but it's incredibly fascinating. Definitely check out the Disney Vault and the history behind it, and the history behind the Disney tapes and all that. But yeah, so it just, I feel like fascinating how like the game outsold the film, which is funny but also kind of a shame because Tron is so good. The film was disqualified from receiving an Academy Award nomination for special effects because the Academy felt at the time that using computer generated effects was cheating. I can kind of see where they're getting at, because again, using AI with today, we're having those same arguments now. Because again, I even though I like AI, like again, I don't want to go into, because I've said it multiple times already in this episode, but again, I feel like AI should help people. I do not support AI art. I don't support AI own movies, because at the end of the day, I've said this before with animation, hand-drawn animation. What makes hand-drawn animation so good is because you can feel the human behind it. And even with the computer-generated sort of movies, you can still feel the human presence behind it. You can feel it in the emotions in the face. You can feel it in the story. You can feel it in everything. You can still feel the human hand, the human creation behind the computer-generated stuff. Whereas when you watch a AI-generated film, even though it looks spectacular, looks brilliant, and it probably was made a lot quicker than what a human can make it, you lose all the heart, you lose all the passion. You know what I mean? So again, Tron, as I said, it's still poignant. It's still one of them things where it's like we're talking about it then and we're talking about it now. It's just the subject matter's changed, but it's the same thing. They wouldn't do this movie back then because they disqualified it because they thought computer generated effects was cheating. We feel the same thing now about AI. How that you wouldn't see a movie that was made completely in AI be offered to win an award or win a sort of Oscar or an Academy Award, anything like that, because we'd say it was cheating or it was wrong, or that you're stealing success and awards away from humans and from people. So we're still having the same arguments. The only difference is it's not 1982 anymore. It's 2025, but it's the same argument. You know what I mean? So it keeps coming up. AI and stuff like that, it keeps coming up. It keeps rearing its head. And as I said, Tron is more poignant now than it ever was back then. I keep getting my point proven. So the next bit of trivia was sort of the state-of-the-art computer used for the film's key special effects had a 2 megabytes of memory and 330 megabytes of storage, which for them was state of the art back then. But a megabyte is tiny compared to a gigabyte or a terabyte that we're using now. I think actually we're past terabyte now. I don't know I can't remember what was past a terabyte, but I think we're actually past a terabyte now, where terabyte is old hat. And nowadays everything is higher. So megabyte huge back then, but now is really, really small. Which again just shows how fast technology is advancing. Next bit of trivia was many Disney animators refused to work on this movie because they feared that computers would put them out of business. Again, same with AI now. In fact, 22 years later, Disney closed its hand-drawn animation studios in favor of CG animation, which they did, which is a sad day that they did that. Hand-drawn animation was ultimately resumed at Disney at the behest of new creative director John Lasseter, also head of Pixar, ironically a computer animated company. So you've seen it a lot recently, where Pixar, even DreamWorks is doing it as well. Disney, they're going back to hand-drawn animation style because that people are pining for it. People who grew up with that want that back, and it's actually those sort of movies that are doing the hand-drawn who are trying something different, even though they're basically taking techniques from the past. Those are the movies that are being more successful now, and I'm glad they are. So yeah, they're even actually going back to doing the hand-drawn animation. They're resurrecting it, which I'm glad. But I just find it interesting where, like, again, back then they feared they were going to put them out of business, computer generation, as they fear now with AI. And it's parallels, man. The parallels are really scary. I'm scaring myself. I'm getting goosebumps, man, because the parallels are so obvious. You know what I mean? And then the last bit of trivia. So, to inspire the actors, arcade games were placed on the production set and could be played during downtime. Jeff Bridges apparently was the most adept at the games and found it hard to tear himself away from a game to shoot a scene, which also is not just brilliant because, again, being a gamer, but also brilliant as well because, his character Flynn is a gamer as well. He has some of the best and high scores. And I'd like to believe, after reading that the scene around the beginning of the movie where Flynn is in his arcade and he's being surrounded by all these people and he's playing arcade games, I'd like to think that was just Jeff Bridges playing the games over and over again. And they were just like, well, we'll just shoot that. We'll just shoot Jeff playing the games. It probably isn't. It probably was sort of thought that was probably planned, but I just like the that sort of headcanon that I've just made. But yeah, so that is the trivia for Tron. Oh God, I've just realised I'm about an hour and 6 minutes. Oh, this review went longer than I thought it was going to be. This is what happens when you get me talking about AI and stuff like that now. But yeah, definitely Tron. It's a very, very poignant and very important movie then. It's more important now because of the subject matter. And I feel like with looking to the future, or technically my future, because as of recording this, it's not out yet. But by the time this is out, it'll be a week or so away from coming out. But looking towards the future with Tron Ares, and looking how the programs are coming into the real world, and even to look into the past, but also the future of this movie with Tron Legacy, what they were doing there. It's one of those things where I feel like Tron is one of them ever sort of present sort of films that sort of inspired a lot of movies moving forwards after this one, and was just one of them movies that just came too early, came too soon. And if it came a bit later, it probably would have done a lot better. But I love this movie. I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I could talk about it for another hour, but I'm not going to, because I feel like I've spoken enough. I feel like I've waffled, to tell you the truth, but I just love this film. And when you love a movie so much, it's hard to be coherent and you just want to talk about all the things that you love, really. So yeah, it's been an absolutely fantastic time. I hope you all enjoyed me talking about Tron. Please do check out all the other things as well. If this episode does well, which I feel like it might do, I hope it does, then I'm going to look into Tron Legacy. But to tell you the truth, I'll probably look into Tron Legacy anyway because I love that movie. That probably won't be till next year because looking at my schedule, I'm pretty booked up for basically from now all the way till the end of the year. But I had an absolutely fantastic time. Hope you all did. I've got loads of new content coming. I've got loads of content in the past as well to check out. So make sure, if you're listening to this on Spotify, to give me a follow, to rate the podcast 5 stars as well. If this is on YouTube, don't forget to leave a like, to put a comment down below what you thought about this review. Are you a Tron fan? Are you not? Do you like the sequels instead? Are you looking forward to Tron Ares? Again, let me know all your thoughts. Subscribe. Again, follow me on Twitter, howdybeans_pod, to be involved whenever I do another sort of questions. Like when I post things on asking people for their thoughts and feelings on movies and games and all that sort of jazz. So, yeah. Thank you very much for joining me. I've been your host, Luke, the Elder Being Construct. You've been to the Howdy Beans podcast, and I'll catch you all in the next one very soon.